Today's video is going to give you everything you need to know about Mehmed, and this is based on my experience using him literally for years. I'm 5 years into this game, I've maxed the overwhelming majority of the commanders, so let's do a deep dive on Mehmed, where he's good in the early game, and how you can use him in the late game, because of all the commanders that are here, he actually does hold up in the end game pretty decently. Hello my friends and welcome back. I'm Chisgule Gaming and I make daily guides designed to help you get value and smash your enemies in Rise of Kingdoms. And as I said, I have worked on the overwhelming majority of the commanders. I've got the end game equipment, the armaments, and often even the legendary inscriptions. And if all that sounds like gobbledygook, don't worry, you'll get there too on your Rise of Kingdoms journey. Consider smashing that subscribe button and I'll be happy to help you on that journey as you pick which commanders to work on, which equipment to optimize, and really the whole 9 yards. But today's video is about Mehmed II. Now, if there's a specific thing that you want or need, use the timestamps in the description and you can jump right ahead. But what I'm going to do in this video is give an overview of why it is that he's still good, who it is that really should be working on him if you're going to put sculptures into him at all, and where it is that you compare him for value. So let's get started with why it is that Mehmed is good. And the weird thing about leadership commanders in the game is that you don't want to use them as primary commanders, almost ever. Like, they're supposed to be leaders, which is hilarious because don't use them as leaders in this game. Don't do it. Okay, trust me. You just got to trust me on that, all right? At this moment in time, in the game's development, leadership is designed for city defense because you have all troop types represented. And that's what leadership as a talent tree is there for. Multiple troop types. The only time you should ever have multiple troop types in an army is really if you're defending your city and maybe a flag or a fort, all right? Now, most people are not going to make the special equipment that it takes to do leadership because there's plenty of other things and there's way too much need for your materials. So only ever take Mehmed, in my opinion, to 4 stars. You can see I've done it. Your gold stars are probably limited. Unlock the 4th skill and you're done. Never make them a primary. If you make them a primary, you have to have special leadership equipment, which will be fine in the early game, but once you get to the late game, it gets a lot more tricky, all right? Now, with all that said, where is Mehmed good as a secondary commander? And he is good when working with really any high skill damage commander. So let's review his kit and talk about why that is. First and foremost, he has a very itty-bitty, narrow fan-shape area of effect that can hit up to 5 enemies, 1350 damage factor when he is expertised. That damage is reduced based on hitting more targets. And if the city or watchtower is targeted, all right, that's basically if you target a city, all right, this skill will deal an extra 800 damage factor and has a 50% chance to deal an extra 500 damage factor. But all we really care about for you is this 1350 damage factor. Area of effect damage can hit 5 troops. For the open field, that's what you're interested in, all right? The second skill gives you 20% attack and 20% more skill damage. Now you can see why I'm saying that he enhances other commanders that you pair with him. The third skill is actually for city hitting specifically, and it does nothing for you. In most situations, this will not be relevant. The 4th skill will give you extra unit capacity. Technically, if you lead a rally, your rallied army can get more unit capacity. That only works these days against a city, I believe. But the 10% extra troop capacity in the open field is okay. Not amazing, but it's fine. And the expertise skill jumped up your active skill damage to that 1350 number that we were just talking about. Now, there's a couple reasons why Mehmed is compelling. First of all, he, as I was mentioning, is good at enhancing the damage of another commander. But second of all, you get the overwhelming majority of the value just when you've maxed the first 2 skills. So you can do what's called a 5-5-1-1 commander. You unlock all the skills, but first you max the first skill, then you max the second skill. And once you've done that, he's probably better than most epics you might have considered using anyways. So a 5-5-1-1 Mehmed ends up being something that you can use in the open field as a secondary and will serve you great, all right? So the other reason that Mehmed is kind of exciting is that he is actually viable in the end game. Now, I'm not saying he's meta in the end game. I'm saying he's viable in the end game. What does that mean? Well, in the end game, you get a building called the museum. And in all my videos about gold key commanders, you're going to hear me talk about this because it's extremely relevant. But if we scroll over, Mehmed, boom, gets a whopping, when you max this out, it's a whopping 30% health and 10% extra skill damage. Hey, yo, that is a lot of buffs. Now, again, this only becomes available in KVK, that's Kingdom vs. Kingdom Season 3. And if you're in the very early game, you're like, what is Kingdom vs. Kingdom? Well, then you have a long time before you'll ever see this building. But this building, once you get this double museum buff of a total of 30% health, 10% skill damage, is going to make it so that you can use Mehmed as a secondary to many of the endgame commanders. Now, if you don't see these endgame commanders, it's because you're in the early game, so you don't even have visibility to them yet. But you can use Nevsky with Mehmed, you could use Boudica with Mehmed, you could use, more likely, people use XY with Mehmed, you could use Minamoto with Mehmed in the early game, and you could do that. It's not a great idea in the late game, but you could do it. Basically, oh, here's Skippy with Mehmed would work. Joan of Arc Prime with Mehmed would work. Basically, any, a Huo with Mehmed would work. Any high skill damage commander, you're going to be able to use Mehmed. So the value of having him and then getting the museum buff, even if you don't max him, is that when you get to the end game and you're thinking about what combos do I want to make, you want to get in place as many of these building blocks as you possibly can. All right. Now, I strongly recommend that you work on at least 3 marches in your early game journey in Rise of Kingdoms: 1 archer, 1 infantry, 1 cavalry. Now, if you're going to make 1 archer, 1 infantry, 1 cavalry, isn't it nice to have a commander like Mehmed floating around that you could use as a secondary commander, potentially in any of those troop type configurations? Do you see the value there? You can shift them around and upgrade your lineup as you see fit. Or when you go up to 4 marches or to 5 marches, you could bring him in as a secondary as needed into your lineup. And that is very powerful. So for all those reasons, Mehmed ends up still being relevant, although not meta, in the end game. Now, the other thing I want to warn you about before you go invest a bunch of universal legendary commander sculptures into Mehmed is that he is a gold key commander, all right? And because you can get him from gold keys, you will eventually, over time, go and max him. Now, people are very critical when I say this, and they try to make fun of me for saying, oh, Chisgule said I shouldn't put any universals into my gold key commanders. 5 years later, I still haven't maxed them, right? But you're not going to care about that in 5 years because you're going to have other commanders that are way more powerful anyways, okay? The downside of putting gold legendary commander sculptures into these commanders is that once you max them, excess sculptures are worthless to you. I'll put this into every darn early game commander video I can, but I'll scroll all the way over, and when you see the extra Mehmed sculptures I have from 5+ years of playing this game, you're gonna be a little sick. 952 dead weight Mehmed sculptures doing literally nothing. I opened those after I already maxed Mehmed. Is what it is. All right? It is what it is. I'd have even more, except Mehmed came into the game actually like I think a year or 2 into the game's development. Like he wasn't here at the start of the game. Anyways, all of that to say that if you needed to put a few sculptures into Mehmed in the early game for a fight, I'd be like, hey, yo, you do you. But don't go rushing sculptures into Mehmed trying to max him out as a free-to-play low spender, thinking you're getting value because you aren't. Because eventually you're going to be looking at all those dead sculptures and you're going to be looking at draws with your gold keys and you get Mehmed and it's like, well, that's worth literally nothing to me. All right. So just be careful when thinking about your investment in Mehmed. The beauty of the way that I'm recommending that you do this is you don't have to use your gold sculptures. You can work on him over time. He can be a secondary and you can still use him in the end game. And that to me feels pretty compelling. Now, I don't think you should go max him. Don't do it. Sorry, let me be clear. I don't think you should take him to max level. Especially as a new player, your stars are limited. Do not max level Mehmed. Like normally in these videos, I talk about, oh, use these talents. But if you're using Mehmed as a primary, something has gone wrong. There's literally never a reason that I can think of to use Mehmed as the primary at the time of this recording anyways, okay? Not only do you have to invest in leadership-specific equipment and some special armaments once you get to that point, but I just don't think the value is there. So use him as a secondary. Enjoy using him in the early game in the following configurations. Let's go over this. First of all, I talked about Minamoto with Mehmed. Perfect combo. He's boosting skill damage. Minamoto does a lot of skill damage. In addition, in the early game, I really like, if you wanted a cavalry march, to go buy bars with Mehmed. I think you get some pretty good value out of that. Another option is to go Ethelfled primary with Mehmed secondary. Now, this is committing you to some leadership gear, which I don't like, but Ethelfled ends up being extremely relevant, strangely enough, because her damage does not diminish based on the number of targets you hit. Most area of effect damage does. And in addition, Ethelfled also gets museum buffs in the end game. So this is like an early game thing that you can do while you're building up your account. And like, you know, they both kind of don't care about whether or not you have mixed troops, which is kind of nice. All right. That's a great place to use your Mehmed. Another place you could consider using it is to do something like Sun Tzu with Mehmed. But here's the downfall of Mehmed. And let's just talk about that because I think it's more important. The downfall of Mehmed is that he does not have march speed. So whoever you're ultimately going to pair him with really ought to move fast, which means you're either going to be picking commanders that have march speed or you're going to be pairing with cavalry, right? That's like what you're going to have to do to offset the fact that he doesn't have any inherent march speed boosts. Of course, you're always going to be hunting for march speed talents, etc., right? But you're going to need to pair him with someone who's got some speed, which is why in the end game, you're likely to see him with cavalry. The only other place you might see him is with Skippy Prime, very end game commander here, so I don't know how relevant this really is in the dialogue, but the thing that Mehmed is doing that I think I want to explain to you, like, hey, look, if you're getting value from this video, do me the honor of throwing a like on here and consider smashing the subscribe button. But the thing that people don't understand about a commander like Mehmed is that he is what I would call an amplifier. An amplifier enhances a commander that already does big things, but you never want to put two amplifiers together. This is why I wouldn't recommend Caesar and Mehmed together. Like, they're both amplifying and they're not doing much, okay? You really want to amplify something significant. Why would I say he's an amplifier? In part because of the attack and skill damage boost, in part because of the troop capacity. The extra troops means that things that are based on a damage factor or healing factor do more damage or do more healing. So this is why I really like in the early game pairing with Minamoto. I suppose in terms of other commanders that have march speed, technically El Cid does. So like you could do archers, I guess. Technically, for example, Thutmose does. So like you could, I guess, do this pairing and it would be fine in the early game. I wouldn't call it great though. Certainly wouldn't do that. But like it's a thing that you could do. All right. And again, you don't have to worry about armaments and equipment because leadership is something that you can just dodge that bullet entirely if you'd like. You don't actually need to have the leadership set in the end game. Is this bad boy over here? It's very good for taking rallies on your city, but you don't actually ever need to do that if you don't want to. So like, and there's no more open field leadership, it would seem. So although the early game will entice you with open field leadership options like Ethelfled, you'll end up in the late game avoiding making any of that equipment at all. All right. So if you enjoyed this vid, found it helpful, throw a like on here, consider subscribing. I make daily Rise of Kingdoms guides designed to help you get value and smash your enemies. So if that's the sort of thing you'd like to see, again, smash that subscribe button and consider joining my Discord server. That's discord.gg/Chisgule. If you enjoyed that vid, leave a comment. Let me know what other questions you have about Mehmed. And if you're looking for other videos about early game commanders, I'll have cards in the end screen. Maybe one about Minamoto, about Double C. If you're interested in those videos, check out those cards. Until next time, you have fun smashing the kingdom.